Friday, December 29th, 2022, just after 8 in the morning. The streets of London's financial district were already alive with the rhythm of commerce, traders clutching paper cups of coffee, security guards changing shifts outside glass-fronted towers that reflected the grey winter sky. Inside two high-rise apartments near Canary Wharf, the morning routine was about to be interrupted. Metropolitan police officers stood outside reinforced doors, warrants in hand, preparing to execute simultaneous raids. They weren't looking for drugs hidden in false walls or weapons stashed under floorboards. What they were about to uncover was something far cleaner, far quieter, and in many ways far more dangerous. Beneath the surface of normality, beneath the veneer of respectable addresses and unremarkable lives, was a network that had been moving millions of pounds across Britain for years, a system built on silence, precision, and the exploitation of trust. Behind one door, money moved without names. Behind another, a network that no one could see was coordinating exchanges across cities, across borders, across currencies. And hundreds of miles away, on the 1st of July 2024, a single message was being sent on the London Underground, one that would eventually expose just how deeply Britain's underworld had learned to hide in plain sight. What investigators uncovered that December morning would draw them into a web of coded messages, fake transactions, encrypted ledgers, and a chain of operatives that stretched far beyond London. It wasn't chaos, it was architecture. Every part of it had been built to be invisible. This is the story of how modern crime adapted to the digital age, how networks learned to operate without paper trails, and how a handful of investigators pieced together fragments of evidence that revealed one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations Britain had seen in years. It's a story about technology and psychology, about loopholes in global finance, and about the quiet operators running Britain's dirty money. And it all began with a discovery that set everything in motion. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. At the center of the first network was a man few had ever heard of. Chi Wang, 29 years old, living quietly in a riverside apartment on the left bank in Manchester. He had no criminal record, no visible wealth, no reason whatsoever to draw attention. He worked from home, kept irregular hours, and to neighbors, he was simply another young professional navigating the complexities of modern urban life. Yet over the course of 3 years, detectives would learn that he was controlling the movement of more than £55 million through the country's financial system, orchestrating a network of couriers, collectors, and coordinators across London, Manchester, and beyond. The connection to him was not immediate. It came from the meticulous recovery of data on several seized phones during earlier raids in East London, operations that at first seemed unrelated to anything Wang was involved in. Officers scrolling through encrypted messages on those devices found an account that appeared repeatedly in transaction logs, a username written in Mandarin that translated, somewhat poetically, to "There is a big sun in the sky." It appeared to be an organizer, someone giving instructions, confirming amounts, managing couriers without ever naming them directly. The tone of the messages was professional, never personal, written with the kind of efficiency that resembled an accountant more than a criminal. Forensic teams began piecing together fragments of digital evidence, a process that would take months. Serial numbers of banknotes photographed and sent through encrypted messaging apps matched cash later seized in raids across London. Timestamps on messages corresponded with physical collections documented by surveillance teams. Patterns emerged slowly, but they emerged clearly. Wang operated like a remote manager, a logistics coordinator for an invisible supply chain. From his apartment in Manchester, he coordinated cash pickups across London, directing operations through encrypted channels, never meeting the people he managed, never touching the money himself. Among those couriers were Xiao Yuyu Shu and Yinying Wang, both based in Canary Wharf, living in luxury apartments that overlooked the Thames. They acted as collectors, receiving large amounts of British pounds from unknown sources, sometimes £250,000 in a single collection, cash delivered in shopping bags, suitcases, sometimes even backpacks. Working alongside them was Yunan Huang, also operating from the same luxury towers in London's financial district. His flat was fitted with counting machines and bags for sorting cash, equipment that suggested this wasn't occasional work, but a full-time operation. Two more operatives, Panglu and Ang Li, ran an unregistered money service business from Peninsula Square, only a few miles away from Canary Wharf. Their role was to handle smaller transfers and keep the flow of cash steady when larger shipments were delayed, essentially acting as a buffer in the system. In Manchester, operatives identified as Ru and Chen provided a regional base, helping Wang manage records and coordinate collections across the north of England. The key to the success of this operation was compartmentalization. Every person knew only their part. Xu and Wang never met the people they collected cash from, and those handing it over never knew who would receive it. It was a system that ensured transactions could occur without names, signatures, or risk of identification. For detectives, the structure looked complete, almost elegant in its simplicity, a network built to leave no trace. But the question remained, how exactly did the money move and who was paying for it? At the heart of the operation was a simple, effective idea that had been refined over decades in various forms across the world. Use people with lawful access to foreign currency to exchange value without touching the formal banking system. The gang relied on a popular Chinese messaging platform to broker deals, private chats where offers were posted, amounts confirmed, and collection points arranged. These messages read like business instructions, sums, times, and a single verification method that replaced every personal detail. The system worked because it solved a real problem for people on both sides of the transaction. Students and other clients in China wanted British pounds, but were constrained by strict capital controls imposed by the Chinese government. China limits personal outward transfers to roughly $50,000 per year, a restriction designed to prevent capital flight and stabilize the nation's currency. For families sending children to study in the UK, or for investors looking to move wealth abroad, these controls posed significant obstacles. To get around that restriction, clients in China would send yuan into designated accounts controlled by the network. In the UK, couriers supplied the agreed amount in sterling to the client or their representative. No cross-border bank transfer linked payer to payee. No wire trail tied a British pickup to a Chinese deposit. Instead, the exchange was completed inside the chain itself, a shadow banking system that existed entirely outside the view of regulators. Verification was deliberately low-tech and highly secure. Each pickup was confirmed by a photograph of a single £5 note showing its unique serial number. That image moved through the encrypted chat to the next participant and acted as proof of exchange. When the recipient handed over cash, the courier compared serial numbers. Only then was the transaction considered complete. The method removed the need for names, bank accounts, or receipts. It reduced every interaction to a code and an image. Records recovered later showed a steady flow of consignments over years, each logged to an internal ledger rather than a regulated account. Operational secrecy was engineered at every level. There were no formal meetings between players and the organizers. The couriers often didn't know Wang's name, only his username. The clients receiving money in the UK didn't know where it came from, only that it arrived. The process was invisible, frictionless, efficient. Yet, as flawless as it seemed, every message, every photograph, every digital interaction left a fingerprint. It was only a matter of time before one of those fingerprints found its way to the police. The story didn't begin with a major raid or an encrypted message intercepted in real time. It started quietly in early 2020, when local officers in North London began to notice a pattern. The same names appeared on different cash declarations filed with authorities. The same streets kept surfacing in unrelated reports of suspicious financial activity. None of it was overtly criminal, but it didn't fit the profile of legitimate business either. There were no invoices, no registered companies, no clear explanation for why certain individuals were handling such large volumes of cash. At the time, the Stoke Newington police team was already familiar with small-scale underground banking. Informal money transfers, often set up to help immigrant communities move funds between the UK and abroad, weren't uncommon. These systems, sometimes called hawala or hundi depending on the region, had existed for centuries and served genuine needs in communities where access to formal banking was limited. But what was emerging in their jurisdiction appeared different. The volumes were larger, the transactions more frequent, and the participants more organized. One name kept appearing: a courier operating out of North London, who was linked to multiple cash pickups across the city. Surveillance teams began tracking his movements, documenting patterns without making direct contact. Over weeks, they observed a routine. Collections happened at predictable intervals, always in public places, cafes, parks, shopping centers, locations with enough foot traffic to blend in but enough space to conduct a discreet handoff. The courier never stayed long. A brief exchange, a bag handed over, sometimes a glance at a phone screen, and then departure. No conversation, no hesitation. The professionalism of it stood out. This wasn't amateurish. It was practiced. When officers finally executed a warrant on the courier's residence, what they found exceeded expectations. Large amounts of cash stored in plain sight, counting machines, multiple phones, each loaded with encrypted messaging apps. One phone in particular contained thousands of messages in Mandarin, transaction logs, instructions, confirmations. Forensic analysts were brought in to translate and map the communications. That's when the name, "There is a big sun in the sky," first appeared. It wasn't clear at first who this person was, only that they seemed to be coordinating operations from elsewhere, issuing instructions remotely, managing a network that extended beyond North London. Investigators began cross-referencing phone data with financial intelligence reports, looking for connections. Bank records showed unusual patterns of deposits and withdrawals, not large enough individually to trigger automatic alerts, but collectively forming a picture of structured transactions designed to stay under regulatory thresholds. Property records revealed that several operatives lived in high-value apartments in Canary Wharf, addresses that didn't match the declared income of individuals with no visible employment history. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the full scope of the network was still unclear. Then came the breakthrough. One of the seized phones contained photographs of banknotes, images that at first seemed mundane, just pictures of cash. But forensic teams noticed something significant. The serial numbers on those notes matched cash seized in an entirely separate operation weeks earlier, a raid conducted by the National Crime Agency on a different network suspected of drug trafficking. The overlap suggested that the money laundering network wasn't serving a single criminal enterprise, but multiple clients, washing cash from various sources through the same system. This realization elevated the investigation. It was no longer just about one gang. It was about infrastructure, a service that existed to support wider organized crime. The National Crime Agency became involved, bringing additional resources, expertise in financial crime, and access to international intelligence networks. Analysts began mapping the flow of money across the UK, identifying key nodes in the network. Manchester emerged as a critical hub, the location where coordination seemed to originate. Surveillance operations expanded. Detectives traveled north, identifying properties, tracking vehicles, documenting connections. And eventually they identified Chi Wang. His apartment in Manchester became the focus of a covert investigation that lasted months. Officers couldn't move too quickly. If they arrested Wang too soon, they risked losing the wider network. If they waited too long, money would continue flowing. Evidence could be destroyed, operatives could flee. The decision was made to conduct simultaneous raids across London and Manchester, targeting multiple locations at once to prevent any warning from reaching other members of the network. That's what brought officers to those two high-rise apartments in Canary Wharf on the morning of December 29, 2022. When the doors were breached, officers found what they expected: cash, counting machines, ledgers, phones. But they also found something unexpected. Evidence of a parallel operation, something that wasn't about money laundering at all, but about identity theft and digital fraud. On one of the phones seized in the Canary Wharf raids was a conversation thread about equipment, technical specifications for a device designed to intercept mobile phone signals. The messages were vague, coded, but forensic analysts recognized the terminology. This wasn't about moving money, this was about moving data. The discovery raised new questions. Was this network expanding into cybercrime, or were they simply facilitating equipment for someone else? The answer would come months later, from an entirely unrelated incident on the London Underground. Before we move forward to that incident, it's important to understand the broader context of what investigators were dealing with. Underground banking networks like the one Wang coordinated aren't unique to the UK. They exist in virtually every country, with immigrant communities and strict currency controls. What makes them dangerous isn't just the money laundering itself, but the infrastructure they create. These networks become pathways for other crimes. Drug proceeds, human trafficking profits, proceeds from fraud, all of it can flow through the same channels because the system is designed to move value without questions. In China, capital controls are a matter of national policy, intended to maintain economic stability and prevent sudden outflows of wealth. But they also create demand for workarounds, and where there's demand, there's supply. For many families, these informal networks are seen not as criminal enterprises, but as practical solutions to bureaucratic obstacles. That perception complicates enforcement. Operatives often justify their actions as providing a service, not committing a crime. But the law is clear. In the UK, operating an unregistered money service business is illegal. Handling criminal property, even unknowingly, is illegal, and the consequences extend beyond the individuals involved. These networks undermine financial systems, enable organized crime, and create security risks that are difficult to quantify. When money moves invisibly, so do threats. The investigation into Wang's network revealed just how large the problem had become. £55 million is not a small amount. It represents thousands of transactions, hundreds of clients, and years of operation. The fact that it went undetected for so long speaks to both the sophistication of the network and the challenges facing law enforcement in an era where communication is encrypted, transactions are digital, and borders are increasingly irrelevant. But even as detectives closed in on Wang and his operatives, another story was unfolding, one that would intersect with this investigation in unexpected ways. That story takes us back several years to 2016, when a separate team of investigators was pursuing a different kind of laundering operation. This one involved physical exchanges, hotel rooms, and a couple who had built a business around washing cash for criminals across London. The investigation began with routine financial intelligence, reports flagged by banks about unusual cash deposits. One account in particular stood out, an account held by a man named Yong Hang Jin. Over a period of months, investigators observed a pattern. Large cash deposits, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds at a time, followed by rapid transfers to accounts overseas. The pattern suggested money laundering, but proving it required more than just bank records. It required evidence of intent, of knowledge that the money was criminal, of a deliberate effort to disguise its origins. Surveillance teams began tracking Jin's movements. He operated out of central London, meeting clients in public spaces, hotels, cafes, always carrying a bag, always calm, always professional. In March 2017, officers executed a warrant at a hotel room where Jin was known to conduct business. What they found was a masterclass in physical money laundering. Inside the room were stacks of cash, totaling over £300,000, bundled neatly, sorted by denomination, ready for transport. There were ledgers, handwritten notes, detailing transactions, dates, amounts, initials of clients. There were multiple phones, each loaded with encrypted messaging apps, contact lists in various languages. And there was Jin himself, caught mid-operation, unable to explain the source of the money or the purpose of his activities. He was arrested on the spot. But investigators knew he wasn't working alone. The ledgers referenced initials, codes, amounts that suggested a broader network. Follow-up searches targeted associates identified through Jin's phone records. One name led to another. Within days, 3 more individuals were arrested. Louis Martz-Gardner and Marcel Mo were identified as facilitators, individuals who helped coordinate pickups and deliveries across London. And then there was Jin's wife, Xiao Kanu, who was found to be managing the administrative side of the operation, keeping detailed records, tracking payments, ensuring that the logistics ran smoothly. The evidence against all 4 was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented transaction logs, phone records, witness statements from individuals who had used their services, and most damning, the cash itself, seized in multiple locations, each bundle traceable to criminal activity. At Kingston Crown Court, there was little left to contest. All four pleaded guilty to money laundering offences. Yong Hung Jin was sentenced to 40 months imprisonment for laundering and controlling criminal property. His wife Xiao Kanu received 42 months, the longest sentence of the group, reflecting her central role in maintaining the operation's records and logistics. Louis Martz Gardner was jailed for 40 months. Marcel Mo received 20 months. In total, the four were handed 11 years and 10 months in prison. The National Crime Agency described the case as a textbook example of how professional launderers sustain wider criminal markets. Without people like Jin, drug traffickers couldn't turn their product into usable wealth. Fraud syndicates couldn't extract value from stolen identities. Human traffickers couldn't collect payments without detection. Launderers are the lubricant of organized crime, and every successful prosecution disrupts that machinery. But the significance of the Jin case went beyond the sentences. The trial drew comparisons to later, larger operations, including the Chinese underground banking network, dismantled in 2024. Investigators began to see patterns, not just within individual cases, but across them. The methods were similar, the technology was similar. Even some of the participants had overlaps, connections that suggested these weren't isolated networks, but part of a broader ecosystem. That realization would prove critical when the next major case emerged, because it involved not just money, but something even more insidious: the weaponization of technology to deceive thousands of people simultaneously. Monday, July 1st, 2024. Evening rush hour on London's Victoria Line, one of the busiest hours of the day when commuters pack into underground carriages, pressed shoulder to shoulder, phones in hand scrolling through messages as the train doors slide open and close at each station. The Victoria Line runs deep beneath central London, connecting major transport hubs, business districts, residential areas. It's a vital artery of the city's infrastructure, carrying hundreds of thousands of passengers every day. Then, almost at once, across multiple carriages, devices began to vibrate. A text message flashed on screens, appearing to come from a legitimate courier service. The wording was familiar, designed to mimic the kinds of messages people receive regularly in an age of online shopping. Your shipment has been suspended due to missing address details. Click here to update. For most passengers, it was an annoyance, a distraction, something to delete without much thought. For one passenger, it was a warning. That commuter noticed something strange on the platform at Victoria Station. A man stood waiting beside a large green suitcase, the kind travelers use for long trips. But he wasn't traveling. He wasn't checking arrival boards, wasn't boarding any train, wasn't moving toward any exit. He was just standing there, watching the passengers, and the message on the commuter's phone had arrived at the exact same moment the man appeared. It was a small detail, the kind of thing most people would dismiss as coincidence. But this particular commuter had a background in IT security, worked for a financial services firm, and had been trained to recognize phishing attempts. Something about the timing felt wrong. The message was too generic, the link looked suspicious, and the man with the suitcase was behaving in a way that didn't fit the normal rhythm of the station. The commuter didn't click the link. Instead, they approached a British transport police officer stationed nearby and explained what they had seen. The officer took the concern seriously. Within minutes, additional officers were dispatched to the platform. They identified the man, approached calmly, asked routine questions. His name was Kong Ji Chen, 31 years old. He told them he was waiting for a friend, that the suitcase contained personal belongings, nothing more. But the officers weren't satisfied. The suitcase was unusually heavy, and when asked to open it, Chen hesitated just long enough to raise further suspicion. They requested permission to search the case. Chen complied, though reluctantly. What they found inside changed everything. There was no clothing, no travel items, no personal belongings. Instead, there was a battery pack, industrial grade, connected by wires to a metal circuit box with an indicator light glowing green. From one end extended a small black antenna, still transmitting faintly. At first glance, it looked like an improvised radio, the kind hobbyists might build for amateur communications. But to the trained eye of a British Transport Police technician called to the scene to assess the device, it was something else entirely. This was a portable SMS blaster, also known in law enforcement circles as a fake cell tower or stingray device. The system had been built to mimic a real mobile signal, tricking nearby phones into connecting to it automatically, overriding their normal connection to legitimate cell towers. Once connected, the device flooded those phones with preloaded messages. In this case, the fake parcel delivery texts that had appeared across the Victoria line only moments before Chen's arrest. As the officers examined the suitcase, one of them felt his own phone buzz. He pulled it from his pocket, looked at the screen, and saw the same fraudulent alert, proof that he too had been within range of the broadcast. That realization changed the tone of the investigation completely. This wasn't a small-scale spam operation, some individuals sending annoying messages for petty fraud. This was a live cyber attack happening beneath the streets of London, in real time, targeting potentially thousands of people simultaneously. Chen was immediately taken into custody. The device was sealed for forensic analysis, and a team from British Transport Police's cyber unit began dismantling it piece by piece, documenting every component, tracing every wire, extracting every bit of stored data. Their findings confirmed what the officers already suspected. Chen had deployed a self-contained, battery-powered SMS transmission unit capable of sending thousands of texts within minutes, completely outside the control of the major phone networks. The device exploited an old vulnerability in mobile communications, the unencrypted 2G signal, which, despite being outdated, is still supported by most phones for backward compatibility. By mimicking a 2G tower, the device could force phones to downgrade their connection, bypassing modern security protocols and injecting messages directly. Data extracted from the equipment revealed that over 165 identical messages had been broadcast between 2:38 p.m. and 10:37 p.m. on July 1st. The timing aligned exactly with reports received by mobile operators and the National Cybersecurity Center, each flagging the same scam link, the same suspicious activity pattern. Investigators quickly realized that if Chen hadn't been caught, if that one observant commuter hadn't noticed the connection between the message and the man with the suitcase, the attack could have continued for hours, potentially reaching tens of thousands of people across London's transport network. The implications were significant. This wasn't just fraud. It was infrastructure sabotage, an attack on public trust in mobile communications. If people couldn't trust the messages appearing on their phones, if they couldn't distinguish between legitimate alerts and sophisticated scams, the entire digital ecosystem became compromised. And Chen wasn't acting alone. Forensic analysis of the device revealed links to overseas suppliers, manufacturers of the equipment who operated in countries with lax regulations around telecommunications technology. The device itself had been purchased online, shipped in components, assembled by someone with technical knowledge. The messages had been preloaded, written in fluent English, designed to exploit the cultural expectation that courier services communicate via text. Every aspect of the operation demonstrated planning, expertise, and intent. This was not opportunistic crime. It was deliberate, calculated, and scalable. When the case reached Inner London Crown Court, the evidence sat plainly before the judge. Kongji Chen, 31 years old, stood accused of possessing or controlling an article for use in fraud. The charge was specific, technical, grounded in legislation designed to address exactly this kind of technological exploitation. He pleaded guilty. Detective Constable Adrienne Curzon of the British Transport Police, the lead investigator on the case, later credited the vigilance of the commuter who first raised the alarm and the swift collaboration between investigators and the country's leading network providers. Together, they confirmed how the device had exploited a known flaw in modern communications: the unencrypted 2G signal, a legacy system that telecommunications companies had been slow to phase out despite repeated warnings from cybersecurity experts. These portable transmitters, sometimes sold online for as little as a few £1,000s, are marketed as tools for testing mobile network security. but in practice, they can be weaponized by anyone with basic technical knowledge. They mimic legitimate mobile towers, tricking phones into believing they are part of the official network. Once connected, users have no idea that their devices are being targeted because the messages never travel through an official carrier. Spam filters, anti-fraud systems, all the protections built into modern telecommunications are powerless to stop them. On October 15, 2024, Chen was sentenced to 24 weeks imprisonment, a short sentence by length, but one that carried a sharp message. The court recognized the severity of the crime, the potential harm to public safety, and the sophistication of the method. But it also reflected the challenges of prosecuting cybercrime in an era where technology evolves faster than legislation. The tools Chen used are not illegal to own in many jurisdictions. The act of broadcasting messages isn't inherently criminal. What made it illegal was intent, the deliberate use of the device to deceive, to defraud, to exploit public trust. Proving intent required forensic evidence, witness testimony, and expert analysis, all of which took time and resources. The case set a precedent, demonstrating that law enforcement could identify, apprehend, and prosecute individuals using these devices. But it also highlighted the scale of the problem. Chen was one person, operating one device for a few hours. How many others were out there undetected, running similar operations? As investigators closed the case on Chen, they couldn't help but notice the parallels with earlier investigations. The professionalism of the operation, the use of encrypted communications, the reliance on technology to create distance between the criminal and the crime. These were the same characteristics that defined the money laundering networks dismantled months earlier. Different methods, different crimes, but the same underlying logic. Use technology to stay invisible, use compartmentalization to limit exposure, and exploit the gaps in regulatory systems that haven't kept pace with innovation. That realization led to a broader conversation within law enforcement about the future of crime, about how networks adapt, how they learn from each other's successes and failures, and how traditional investigative techniques need to evolve to keep pace. The cases we've examined, Wang's money laundering network, Jin's cash operation, Chen's SMS blaster, represent different facets of the same challenge. They are snapshots of a landscape where crime is no longer confined to physical spaces, where borders are porous, where technology enables scale that was unimaginable a generation ago. But they also represent something else, the resilience and adaptability of law enforcement. Every one of these networks was dismantled, every operative was identified, arrested, prosecuted. The methods used to catch them, financial intelligence, digital forensics, surveillance, international cooperation, represent the cutting edge of investigative work. Yet for every network dismantled, others emerge, learning from the mistakes of their predecessors, refining their methods, exploiting new technologies. The underground banking system that Wang coordinated continues to exist in various forms across the UK and beyond. The demand for currency exchange outside official channels hasn't diminished. The capital controls in China remain in place. The economic incentives that drive these networks haven't changed. What has changed is awareness, both within law enforcement and among the public. Cases like these receive media attention. Educational campaigns highlight the risks, and regulatory agencies implement new measures to close loopholes. But the fundamental tension remains. How do you regulate a system designed to exist outside regulation? That question doesn't have an easy answer. Some argue for stricter controls, greater surveillance, more aggressive enforcement. Others point to the unintended consequences of over-regulation, the ways it can harm legitimate businesses, infringe on privacy, and create new incentives for circumvention. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the complexity. What's clear is that these cases matter. They matter to the families whose lives are upended by fraud. They matter to the communities where organized crime takes root. They matter to the integrity of financial systems that underpin modern economies. And they matter to the investigators who spend years piecing together evidence, following leads, building cases. The work is painstaking, often invisible, rarely glamorous, but it's essential. And in each of these cases, that work produced results. Chi Wang, once the invisible coordinator of a £55 million network, is now facing prosecution. The operatives in Canary Wharf, Manchester, and across London have been arrested, their assets seized, their networks disrupted. Yong Hang Jin and his associates are serving prison sentences, removed from the criminal ecosystem they once facilitated. Kong Ji Chen's brief foray into cyber fraud ended with a criminal conviction, a warning to others considering similar schemes. These outcomes represent victories, but they're not final. The networks will adapt, new operatives will emerge, new technologies will be exploited, and the cycle will continue. What changes is the response, the level of preparedness, the sophistication of the tools available to investigators, and the willingness of society to invest in the unglamorous but necessary work of combating invisible crime. The legacy of these cases extends beyond the individuals prosecuted. They've shaped policy discussions about financial regulation, telecommunications security, and international cooperation. They've informed training programs for law enforcement, highlighting the skills needed in an era where criminals operate across digital and physical domains. They've raised public awareness about the risks of clicking unknown links, the signs of financial fraud, the importance of reporting suspicious activity, and perhaps most importantly, they've demonstrated that no network is truly invisible, that every system leaves traces, that with enough patience, expertise, and resources, even the most sophisticated criminal operations can be unraveled. The challenge now is to maintain that momentum, to ensure that the lessons learned aren't forgotten, that the investments in capability aren't reversed, and that the next generation of investigators has the tools they need to confront the next generation of crime. Because one thing is certain, the criminals are already planning their next move.